it's only been the last less than 200 years that we've had any knowledge of the mechanism of how we got here. Remember, Darwin was late 1800s. So this is brand new stuff. In fact, we're making fantastic progress. We're going in less than 200 years from no knowledge to DNA genome sequences. So that many of these things may have happened in a number of different ways. One of the ways I'm saying is that if we have a person who becomes, for whatever, however they get there, less melanated than somebody else, then in North Central Europe, they had a greater opportunity to stay alive than somebody who was heavily melanated. Now, something else that most of us are not aware of is the difference in population. We know on the planet there's 6 to 8 billion people. There's always been 6 to 8 billion people know. Back around 1 AD, there are only about 200 million people on the planet. When you get down between the 1500s and the year 2000, particularly in the late 1800s, during the Industrial Revolution, this is when population really takes off. As people begin to have a better way of life, preserve their life, and staying alive longer. So the population has swelled over the last several hundred years. But in much earlier times, there were many fewer people on the planet. And that's important because in a moment we start talking about African Eve, you'll be able to see more clearly how all the people on the planet can be related to the same basic stock, if in fact there were not as many people as there are now. Now, I put this slide here because the Earth is on a 23-degree and 27-minute angle to the sun. And that white line there is the imaginary line called the equator. And if you take the arrow that says to the sun and just turn it back the other way, you can see that the area of the equator would get most of, as the Earth turns, get most of the sun. The area above that in the northern hemisphere and the area below that in the southern hemisphere get glancing sun. And so that the areas where the sun is the brightest are the areas where there'd be the most ultraviolet light coming through the atmosphere, but then also be the area of the planet where the people who live there will need the greatest protection from that ultraviolet light. Now, sunlight is critical to our staying alive. And you have to have sunlight go through the skin level to create vitamin D. Vitamin D then pulls out the calcium out of foods to form strong bones and bodies, particularly critical for the female, because the female's pelvic area has to be strong enough to support her weight and the weight of her child when she's expecting, she's pregnant. Now, this diagram is a little complicated to look at, but what I wanted to show here was that there are certain times during the year when the sun is lowest on the horizon, and certain times when the sun is higher on the horizon. See my light here, my light there. This elliptic right here is the path of the sun during the year. The summer solstice, the sun is at the highest point in the northern hemisphere. For the winter solstice, the sun is really focused in the southern hemisphere, so it's therefore at the lowest point in the northern hemisphere. Everybody see that? At this point right here, the autumnal equinox and the vernal equinox, the path of the sun crosses the path of the equator. In the vernal equinox, moving from the winter to the summer, going this way. This is the point where across the equator, equal day, equal night in both hemispheres. And then from June 21st on, it starts descending, crossing the equator again, passing the sun, crossing the equator again, at the autumnal equinox, September 21st. Then continue on to the winter solstice on December 21st. If you drew a line plotting the sun, drew a line this way, it will start at a low point here, and as the spring comes, the line will go up and up and up till you get to the summer solstice. And then once again, after the summer solstice, the line will go down as you approach the winter solstice. Is that pretty clear to everybody?
Yeah.
That's why the ancients said the sun was going down in the cave. Which was the original way they talked about the death of the sun. And then, of course, they said that the sun was being born out of the cave, which is the way they talked about the birth of the sun on December 25th. Again, it's a function of the way the planet is organized. Now, this is a map that talks about ultraviolet light. And as you can see, in the northern hemisphere, here, you have this lights. You have the least amount of sunlight coming through. So now, if you were a heavily melanated person living in the northern hemisphere, you'd have some difficulty because of the very protection that the Creator gave you to protect you in Africa would now prevent a little bit of light that's coming through, getting through your skin. And you must have vitamin D to pull out calcium and make strong bones and bodies. Likewise, right at the equatorial level, you have the heaviest concentration of ultraviolet light, and so you need to have the heaviest concentration of protection. So people are dark around the equator. And then as you get down into the parts of the southern hemisphere, as with the northern hemisphere, the light is glancing light, not strong light. So it's to your benefit to have less melanin to be able to absorb more sunlight. Okay? Again, these are all very, very simple concepts, but concepts that you never got in school. In my understanding of Africa and Egypt is that in Egypt, when you went to the university, guess what the first thing was you learned about?
Astronomy.
Universe.
The universe.
That's why I call it universe.
There you go. Remember what they put on the temples in Egypt? As above, so below. You know, man, know thyself, because you are a microcosm of the macrocosm. Don't have to say everything is everything. So the first thing that they would do in ancient schools was to give you a knowledge of the universe in which you live, so you understand how things function. And that's about the last thing you get these days. To the point that most people don't even make a connection between the word university and the word universe. Okay. Now, somebody mentioned albinism. Albinism is a condition that affects about 1 person in 17,000 in the U.S. I'm not sure what the world figures are. These are figures in the U.S. About 1 in every 17,000 people have albinism. These individuals fail to produce melanin, a photoprotective pigment. While melanin's role in protecting us from ultraviolet light is understood, it also has other important functions in the development of the retina and brain and their interconnection, of which we know much less. By the way, many studies are going on now very quietly at NIH, studying melanin. Now, this, I took this from a Washington Post article. Some of you may have seen it, some may not have seen it. Scientists find a DNA change that accounts for white skin. Washington Post, Friday, December 16, 2005. Now, I've given out several times here the website www.newsvoyager.com, NEWSVOYAGER.com, www.newsvoyager.com. That's the website for all of the newspapers in the United States. that's published on the web. This morning already, before I came to class, I read the Washington Post, New York Times, and the LA Times. I skim those every day. I add the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Chicago Tribune, Chicago Sun, the Boston Herald, the Christian Times Monitor. On Sunday, I have a veritable feast of newspapers.
Just the front page?
No, entire paper, everything. There's another site also. If you type into your web browser, in quotations, thousands of newspapers, space newspapers, end quote. A number of sites will pop up. They're all about the same. I like one better than the other because of the way it's formatted. These are the newspapers in the world, organized by region of the world. On the weekends, I read world newspapers. Now, because English is the lingua franca, which is the interesting term, lingua franca really dates back to a time when French was the language of commonality. Now English is the language of commonality, but the term lingua franca still carries over, okay? Because English is the lingua franca, the language of the world. Many of the newspapers around the world are published in English. So you can go to France and at least 4 or 5 newspapers published in English. You can go to Saudi Arabia and there's 4 or 5 newspapers published in English. So this was fun. I skimmed the world on the weekends. And once again, you can get a different perspective on what's going on in the world than you get reading newspapers here. I found consistently that I get better information about what's going on in Washington, D.C. from the newspapers in New York than I do from the Washington Post. So it's very helpful to read newspapers. You can, for a small fee, I think $3.95, you can copy articles from most newspapers. I would advise you to go back again to your library and go to the Washington Post, go to the archives, type in "scientists find a DNA change," and that article, this article will pop up. It's also in the New York Times. Save this article, circulate the people who you meet, because most folks will not have had any knowledge of this. Now, scientists said yesterday that they've discovered a tiny genetic mutation that largely explains the first appearance of white skin in humans tens of thousands of years ago. A finding that helps solve one of biology's most enduring mysteries and illuminates one of humanity's greatest sources of strife. The work suggests that the skin whitening mutation, remember Dr. Wells said years ago that white folks just have to get uncomfortable being genetic recessive albino mutants? Okay. This is Washington Post saying now being white is a mutation. See, we grew up in an era where being white was right. Everybody else was wrong. But now they're coming out with the truth. The work suggests that the skin whitening mutation occurred by chance in a single individual after the first human exodus from Africa. When all people were brown skinned. Now, this is the Washington Post. December 16th. This should have been a worldwide newsflash. Special report. All the music was not Dan Rasmussen better work news desk. It was the New York Times, the Washington Post, covering almost no papers down south. That person's offspring apparently thrived as humans moved northward into what is now Europe, helping to give rise to the lightest of the world's races. Leaders in the study at Penn State University, not Cooper University, they say Howard, it's at Penn State, warned against interpreting the finding as a discovery of the race gene. Race is a vaguely defined biological, social, and political concept. They know it. And And skin color is only part of what racist is and is not, as you said. Yeah, as we said, the term race is used incorrectly every day. Everybody on the face of this earth, so far as we know, belongs to the same race, called the human race. Now, I've said in jest, I think I've come in contact with a few Cro-Magnons in Java. I remember two Neanderthals. But as Neely Fuller says, since I can't prove it, I gotta give them the benefit of the doubt, call that human too.
Excuse me, before you go, you said we can get this from,
If you go to the Washington Post,
thousandsofnewspapers.com?
for this one, you can go to the Washington Post news site is www.washingtonpost.com. You can go to that site, or you can go to News Voyager, which are all the papers in the country. When you go to the site, click on archives, on search, type a few of the words, if you type in scientists find a DNA change, that'll bring this article up. If you get that, just type in DNA. Now, type in DNA, you'll get a whole lot of articles, gotta sift through it. But you can find anything you want to find using the search function. Once you've done that, because it's America now, you can purchase the article. Purchase it, download it to your computer, save on this. I have several disks now, manufactured over time, important articles I've saved over the years, because remember 1984, in the movie 1984, sometimes news will change. Particularly now that news is in electronic form.
Anybody know the other site for the international?
Thousands of
Now,
newspapers.
just go to a web browser like Google and type in quotes, thousands of newspapers. Okay? In fact, several scientists said